Gaming Agency and Structure. Robert McDougall and Lisa Faden from Zones of Control, Perspectives on Wargaming. So games can teach simulation literacy. This is a good reason for making games part of the 21st century classroom, and it fits strongly with the goals of multi-literacies education. But it is not an especially strong case for using games in the history classroom. We still need to ask which goals of history education can wargames or simulation games support. Simulation games can engage some of history's fundamental questions, combining the cognitive skills emphasized by the history as disciplinary knowledge model with the civic dimensions of the history as citizenship approach. For instance, games and game design foreground the question of agency and structure, an issue that has been at the heart of historical thinking for more than a generation. Agency is a magic word for modern historians. It can be defined loosely as the capacity of individuals to make meaningful choices in their lives. Structure is agency's counterweight, everything which limits those choices or their significance. The great project of the new social history that emerged in the 1960s and 1970s was to uncover the agency of ordinary people. Where structure ends and agency begins has been a maelstrom of historical debate ever since. Wargames can help teachers and students engage this debate. Agency as a concept is often slippery and abstract, but games make agency and structure explicit. The line between structure and agency is ultimately analogous to the line between a game's rules and the choices of its players. A top-down strategy game in which players command the movements of large armies and battalions, but roll morale checks to see whether individual units scatter or retreat, locates agency in a very different place than a first-person shooter in which players take the roles of individual soldiers following orders provided by a computer or pre-written scenario. Game designer Sid Meier once defined a game as a series of interesting decisions. In a historical simulation game, the players take on the roles of those who made interesting decisions. The rules of the game define the structure that constrained those decisions. Play can be defined as the tension between the rules of the game and the freedom to act within those rules. Wright, Douglas Thomas, and John Seely Brown. Play, in other words, explores the boundaries of agency and structure and, quote, the ability to make interesting decisions, end quote, is about as succinct a definition of historical agency as we are likely to find. Thus, teachers can use games and game design to engage questions of historical agency in ways that are accessible and concrete. Who are the players in this game? Who are the historical actors in this conflict? What meaningful choices did they have? What could they control and not control? There are thought-provoking historical arguments embedded in the rules of all our games. Once military history was largely a chronicle of grand strategies and campaigns. Generals and kings were the only actors believed to have real agency. Wargames adopted the same top-down perspective. Today, the most popular simulations of war are first-person video games offering immersive identification with a single frontline combatant. Is it a coincidence that role-playing games grew out of the 1-to-1 scale wargames in the 1970s? The very same years in which the new military history was discovering the agency of individual soldiers. Well, yes, probably, but it's still interesting. Wargames are also sites for exploring and debating historical memory. As Andrew Wakerfuss reports in this volume, first-person video games set in World War II are common and extremely popular, but game designers have struggled to create similar games about World War I. Ted Racer's chapter in this book makes a similar point regarding tabletop games, astutely attributing the difficulty to popular understandings of World War I as a long, static stalemate. Most of us do not believe that individual soldiers in the trenches of the Great War possess the same kind of agency as their counterparts in World War II. That is a significant historical judgment embedded in game design. By contrast, almost all video games about the Vietnam War are first-person shooters. Top-down strategy games about Vietnam are rarely seen. This says much about the nature of what war and also undoubtedly about the influence of war movies on collective memory. A top-down perspective might seem appropriate for modeling the war in Vietnam, in which the United States military placed tremendous emphasis on strategic air power. But on film, the Vietnam War is almost exclusively depicted through images of infantrymen on foot patrol. In World War II, called the Good War, seems amenable to gaming in almost every genre. What are the links between game design, historical agency, and our more generally positive memories of this war? Critical gameplay, and better yet, critical game design, would be a fascinating way for students to grapple with these issues.